The rain was cold, the sirens were louder, and Adrian Cole, exhausted, broke, and just trying to get his daughter home, was suddenly face down against a squad car in front of dozens of strangers. He hadn't done anything wrong. But in that moment, under the flashing lights and the weight of hands pushing him into the metal, none of that mattered. What he didn't know was that one woman in the crowd, polished, powerful, and carrying her own silent war, was watching. And she wasn't going to forget his face. If you want to see where this story goes, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Adrian Cole's hands were shaking, not from fear, not yet, but from exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones after a 12-hour shift moving boxes in a warehouse that smells like diesel and sweat. His shoulders ached. His knees felt like they belonged to someone 20 years older, and his daughter Mia was waiting for him at the sitter's house 6 blocks away. He pulled his jacket tighter against the October rain and kept his head down. The sidewalk was slick, the streetlights casting long, uneven shadows across the pavement. It was just after 8, and the city had that heavy post-rush hour quiet, the kind where you could hear your own footsteps and wish they were quieter. Adrian wasn't thinking about much. Just Mia. Just getting home. Just making it through another day without something breaking. Then the sirens started. At first they were distant, background noise in a city that never fully shut up. But they got louder, closer. And then the red and blue lights were right behind him, painting the wet street in violent color. Adrian stopped walking. He turned slowly, carefully, the way you do when you know that sudden movements get misread. 2 patrol cars had pulled up to the curb, doors already opening. 4 officers stepped out, hands on their belts, eyes locked on him. "Hey!" one of them called out. "You! Stay right there!" Adrian's stomach dropped. "Me?" His voice came out thinner than he wanted. "Yeah, you. Don't move." He didn't. He stood there in the rain, his heart starting to pound now, his mind scrambling to figure out what the hell was happening. He hadn't done anything. He was just walking home. He was just tired. One of the officers approached, a broad-shouldered guy with a buzz cut and a face that didn't give anything away. "Turn around, hands on the car." "Wait, what's going on?" Adrian's voice cracked a little. "I didn't—" "Hands on the car. Now!" Adrian's breath hitched. His instinct was to argue, to explain, to ask why. But he'd lived long enough to know that instinct got people hurt. So he turned. He placed his palms flat against the cold, wet hood of the squad car. And he felt the officer's hands pat him down. Rough, impersonal, efficient. "What's your name?" "Adrian Cole." "ID?" "In my wallet, back pocket." The officer pulled it out, stepped back, and shined a flashlight on it. Adrian kept his eyes forward, his jaw tight. Around him, people had started to gather. Not a crowd, but enough. A couple on the corner, a guy smoking under an awning. A woman in a long coat standing near a coffee shop window, her phone in her hand. The officer with the flashlight muttered something into his radio. Another one circled around, looking Adrian up and down like he was trying to match a photograph. "You live around here?" the first officer asked. "Yeah, about 10 minutes that way." Adrian nodded toward the east side. "I was just walking home from work." "Where do you work?" "Northside Distribution. I'm a loader." The officer didn't respond, just kept staring at the ID like it owed him money. Adrian's pulse was hammering now. He could feel the rain soaking through his jacket, cold water sliding down the back of his neck. He wanted to ask what this was about. He wanted to know why they'd stopped him, what they thought he'd done, why 4 cops needed to surround one guy walking home in the rain. But he didn't ask, because he already knew the answer wouldn't matter. "Stay here," the officer said, and walked back toward the car. Adrian stood there, hands still on the hood, trying not to let the humiliation chew through him. He could feel the eyes on him, the couple whispering, the guy under the awning taking a picture, and the woman in the long coat still standing there, still watching, her expression unreadable. Minutes passed. The rain got heavier. Finally, the officer came back. He handed Adrian his wallet without a word. "You're good. Sorry for the inconvenience." That was it. No explanation. No apology that sounded like it meant anything. Just, "You're good," and a wave of the hand like they were dismissing a waiter. Adrian took the wallet, his hand still trembling. What was this about? The officer hesitated, then shrugged. Mistaken identity. Someone called in a guy matching your description a few blocks over. Guess it wasn't you. Guess not, Adrian said quietly. The officer got back in the car. The lights cut off. The engine started. And just like that, they were gone. Adrian stood there for a long moment, the rain drumming against his shoulders, his chest tight with something he couldn't quite name. Anger, shame, relief. All of it tangled together. He turned and started walking again. Behind him, the woman in the long coat was still watching. By the time Adrian got to the sitter's house, his hands had stopped shaking, but his mind was still spinning. Mrs. Nguyen opened the door before he could knock. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who ran a daycare out of her living room and had seen enough of life not to be surprised by much. "You're late," she said, but her tone was soft. "I know, I'm sorry." Adrian stepped inside, dripping water onto her mat. Got held up. Mia was sitting on his couch in her pajamas, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, her eyes glued to a cartoon on the TV. When she saw him, her whole face lit up. "Daddy!" She launched herself off the couch and ran straight into his arms. Adrian caught her, lifted her up, and held on tight. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and crackers, and for a moment, everything else fell away. "Hey, Bug," he murmured into her hair. "You been good?" "Uh-huh. We made cookies. Mrs. Nguyen let me have 2. 2, huh? You save me any?" Mia giggled. "No." Adrian smiled despite everything. "Figures." Mrs. Nguyen handed him Mia's backpack and coat. "She ate dinner. Finished her homework too. Well, most of it." "Most of it?" Adrian raised an eyebrow at his daughter. Mia squirmed. "I got stuck on the spelling words." "We'll finish them at home," Adrian said. He looked at Mrs. Nguyen. "Thanks. I'll get you the rest of what I owe you Friday." She waved a hand. "Don't worry about it. Just get that girl home before she falls asleep standing up." Adrian nodded, grateful in a way that made his throat tight. He bundled Mia into her coat, grabbed the backpack, and headed back out into the rain. The walk home was quiet. Mia held his hand and hummed the theme song from her cartoon, her little boots splashing through puddles. Adrian kept his other hand shoved in his pocket, his mind still circling back to the squad car, the officers, the woman watching from across the street. He wondered if anyone had recorded it, if it would end up online, if his boss would see it and decide he didn't want that kind of attention around the warehouse. He hated that he had to think like that. "Daddy?" Adrian looked down. Mia was staring up at him, her face scrunched in concern. "Yeah, Bug? Are you sad?" His chest tightened. "No, baby, just tired." "Me too," she said, and leaned her head against his arm. Adrian squeezed her hand and kept walking. Bashot. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The hallway smelled like old carpet and somebody's burnt dinner. The lock on their door stuck half the time. But it was warm, and it was theirs, and that was enough. Adrian got Mia inside, helped her out of her coat, and sent her to brush her teeth while he collapsed onto the couch. The springs creaked under his weight. He closed his eyes and let his head fall back, trying to let the day drain out of him. It didn't work. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from his sister, Lauren. "You alive?" Adrian typed back. "Barely." "That good, huh?" "Long day. Want to talk about it?" He stared at the screen for a moment, then put the phone down without answering. He loved his sister, but he didn't have the energy to explain what had happened tonight. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Mia came padding back into the living room in her pajamas, her rabbit dragging behind her. "Can we read a story?" Adrian opened his eyes. "You pick one out. I'll be right there." She ran to her room, and Adrian forced himself off the couch. He stopped by the bathroom to splash water on his face, then grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen and downed it in 3 gulps. When he got to Mia's room, she was already in bed, holding up a picture book about a bear who couldn't sleep. "This one," she said. Adrian sat down on the edge of the bed and took the book. He'd read it 100 times. He could probably recite it from memory at this point. But he opened it anyway and started reading, his voice low and steady. Mia curled up against his side, her eyes already starting to droop. By the time he got to the last page, she was asleep. Adrian closed the book carefully and set it on the nightstand. He stayed there for a minute, just watching her breathe. She looked so small, so trusting, like the world was still a safe place. He wanted to keep it that way as long as he could. Finally, he leaned down and kissed her forehead, then turned off the light and slipped out of the room. Back in the living room, he sat down at the small table by the window and pulled out the stack of bills he'd been avoiding all week. Electric, water, rent, late notices on 2 of them. He did the math in his head, then did it again, hoping it would come out different the second time. It didn't. He'd have enough to cover rent and maybe 1 utility. The rest would have to wait. Again. Adrian rubbed his eyes and let out a long, shaky breath. He was so damn tired. Not just physically. Tired of scraping by. Tired of being 1 bad day away from disaster. Tired of feeling like he was failing even when he was doing everything right. He looked out the window at the rain-soaked city below, the lights blurred and distant. And he wondered, not for the first time, if this was all there was ever going to be. Across town, in a high-rise office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, Vivian Hart was still at her desk. It was almost 10. Her assistant had gone home hours ago. The rest of the floor was dark and empty, but Vivian was still working, the glow of her laptop screen casting sharp shadows across her face. She'd been trying to focus on the quarterly report in front of her for the last 30 minutes, but her mind kept drifting. Back to the street. Back to the man in the rain. She'd been leaving a late meeting, walking to her car, when the police lights had caught her attention. She'd stopped, like everyone else, and watched as they pulled a man out of the crowd and pushed him against the car. She'd seen his face, seen the confusion, the fear, the way his hands had trembled when they took his wallet. And she'd felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, anger, not at him, at the whole thing, the ease with which it had happened, the casual cruelty of it, the way the officers had walked away like it was nothing, like they hadn't just humiliated a man in front of strangers for no reason. Vivian had wanted to say something, to step forward and ask what the hell they thought they were doing, but she hadn't. She just stood there, frozen, her hands clenched around her phone, and then he'd walked away, and the moment was gone. Now, hours later, she still couldn't shake it. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, staring out at the city lights. She didn't know the man's name, didn't know anything about him. But she couldn't stop seeing his face. She wondered if he was okay, if he'd gotten home, if he had anyone waiting for him. And she wondered why she cared. Vivian wasn't used to caring about strangers. She'd built her entire life on control, precision, and emotional distance. She ran a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She made decisions that affected thousands of people, and she did it all without flinching. But something about that man, the exhaustion in his eyes, the quiet way he'd endured it, had gotten under her skin. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. David Kim, her head of security, former LAPD, now private sector, and one of the few people she trusted completely. She hesitated for a moment, then typed out a message. Need a favor. Can you look into something for me? The reply came back almost immediately. Sure. What do you need? Vivian stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then she typed, There was an incident tonight, corner of 5th and Maple. Police stopped a man. I want to know who he was and why they stopped him. A pause. Then, You got a name? No. But I have a description, and I have the time. I'll see what I can find. Vivian set the phone down and stood up, walking over to the window. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and looked out at the city below. She didn't know why she was doing this, but she couldn't let it go. 2 days later, Adrian was stacking boxes in the warehouse when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He was on the clock, and his supervisor didn't like people taking personal calls during shifts. But the number wasn't one he recognized, and something made him pick up. Hello? Is this Adrian Cole? The voice was unfamiliar, professional, female. Yeah, who's this? My name is Vivian Hart. I'm calling because I witnessed what happened to you on Wednesday night, the incident with the police. Adrian froze, the box in his hand suddenly feeling too heavy. What? I was there, she said. I saw the whole thing, and I wanted to reach out. Why? There was a pause. Because it wasn't right, and because I think you deserve to know that someone saw it and gave a damn. Adrian set the box down slowly, his heart starting to race. I don't understand. Who are you? Someone who wants to help, she said. If you'll let me. Adrian didn't know what to say. His first instinct was to hang up. This didn't make sense. People didn't just call out of nowhere to help. Not in his world. But something in her voice, steady, certain, like she'd already decided this mattered, made him hesitate. Help how? He asked quietly. That depends on what you need, Vivian said. But we should probably talk in person. Adrian's mind was spinning. I don't even know you. I know, but you will. She gave him an address, a coffee shop, tomorrow at noon. You don't have to come, she added, but I hope you will. Then she hung up. Adrian stood there in the warehouse, his phone still pressed to his ear, the dial tone buzzing in the silence. And for the first time in 2 days, he felt something other than exhaustion. He felt curious. The coffee shop was small, tucked into a corner of downtown that Adrian didn't usually spend time in. It had brick walls, Edison bulbs, and the kind of prices that made him wince when he glanced at the menu. He got there 5 minutes early and ordered the cheapest thing they had, black coffee, no sugar. Then he sat down at a table near the window and waited. At exactly noon, the door opened and a woman walked in. She was striking in a way that made people look twice. Tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Adrian's rent. Her hair was pulled back, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. But when she saw him, something in her face softened. She walked over and stopped at the edge of the table. Adrian? He nodded, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his work jacket and scuffed boots. I'm Vivian, she said, and held out her hand. He stood and shook it. Her grip was firm, confident, but not cold. Thanks for coming, she said, sitting down across from him. Adrian sat back down slowly, still trying to figure out what the hell was happening. Yeah, I'm still not sure why I did. Because you're curious, Vivian said, and because you know what happened to you wasn't okay. Adrian looked down at his coffee. It's over. I'm fine. Are you? He glanced up. Her eyes were steady, direct, and there was no pity in them, just honesty. I don't need anyone feeling sorry for me, Adrian said quietly. I don't, Vivian replied, but I do think you deserve better than being treated like that and having no one say a word. Adrian didn't know how to respond to that. He took a sip of his coffee, buying time. Vivian watched him for a moment, then leaned back in her chair. I looked into it, the stop. The officer said they were responding to a call about a suspect in the area. The description was vague. You matched it. They realized their mistake and let you go. So it was just bad luck, Adrian said. Maybe, Vivian said. Or maybe it was lazy policing. Either way, you didn't deserve it. Adrian set his cup down. Why do you care? Vivian hesitated, and for the first time her composure cracked just a little. Because I was standing there watching, and I didn't do anything. And that's been bothering me ever since. Adrian stared at her. He didn't know what he'd expected, but it wasn't that. You didn't know me, he said. You didn't owe me anything. No, Vivian agreed. But that doesn't mean I should have just walked away. They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the coffee machine hissing in the background. Finally, Adrian spoke. So what now? Now, Vivian said, I'd like to get to know you, if that's okay. Adrian frowned. Why? Because you seem like someone worth knowing, she said simply. And despite everything, despite the strangeness of this, despite the part of him that wanted to run, Adrian believed her. Adrian didn't expect to see Vivian Hart again after that first coffee. He'd walked out of the shop that afternoon feeling disoriented, like he'd stepped into someone else's life for an hour and couldn't quite find his way back to his own. The whole conversation had been surreal. A CEO, an actual CEO, had tracked him down, sat across from him in a coffee shop that smelled like expensive espresso, and told him she wanted to get to know him. It didn't make sense. People like her didn't spend time with people like him. That was just how the world worked. So when his phone buzzed 3 days later with a text from an unknown number, he almost deleted it without reading. Hi, it's Vivian. Are you free this Saturday? There's a farmer's market near the harbor. Thought you might want to check it out. Adrian stared at the message for a long time. He typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, why? Her reply came back almost immediately. Because I like farmers markets, and because I'd like to see you again. Adrian sat on the edge of his bed, his daughter's laughter echoing from the living room where she was watching cartoons, and tried to figure out what the hell he was supposed to do with this. He should say no. He should thank her politely and move on. He had enough on his plate without adding complicated questions to the mix, but his thumbs were already typing. I have my daughter on Saturdays. Bring her. Adrian blinked. He read the message again, then a third time, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her to backtrack, to say she hadn't realized, to politely rescind the invitation. It didn't come. Instead, she sent another text. I'll meet you there at 10. There's a booth that sells the best apple cider donuts you've ever had. Adrian looked at the screen for another moment, then made a decision he wasn't entirely sure was smart. Okay. When Saturday morning came, Adrian spent 20 minutes trying to explain to Mia who they were meeting and why. Is she your friend? Mia asked, sitting on the bathroom counter and swinging her legs while Adrian tried to make himself look halfway decent. Kind of, Adrian said, running a hand through his hair and giving up on it. She's someone I met recently. Is she nice? I think so. Does she have kids? I don't know. Mia considered this. Is she your girlfriend? Adrian nearly dropped the comb. No, definitely not. Then why are we meeting her? Because she invited us, Adrian said, and realized how weak that sounded. Look, just be yourself, okay? Be polite. Don't ask her weird questions. I don't ask weird questions, Mia said, offended. Adrian gave her a look. Okay, sometimes I ask weird questions, she admitted, but only because I want to know things. Just try to keep the weird ones to yourself today, all right? Mia nodded solemnly. I'll try. The farmer's market was packed by the time they arrived. Rows of white tents stretched along the waterfront, vendors selling everything from organic vegetables to handmade jewelry. The air smelled like fresh bread and coffee, and a guy with a guitar was playing somewhere in the distance. Adrian spotted Vivian almost immediately. She was standing near the entrance, dressed down in jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different like this, softer, less intimidating. When she saw them, she smiled. Adrian, she said, walking over. Then she looked down at Mia. And you must be Mia. Mia stared up at her with wide eyes. You're really tall. Mia, Adrian said quickly, but Vivian just laughed. I am. I get that a lot. Are you a basketball player? Nope. Just tall. Mia seemed to accept this. Do you like donuts? I love donuts, Vivian said seriously. Me too, Mia said, and just like that, they were walking through the market together like it was the most natural thing in the world. Adrian fell into step beside Vivian, his hands shoved in his pockets. Thanks for this, he said quietly. For what? For not running when I said I had a kid. Vivian glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Why would I run? Adrian shrugged. Most people do. Vivian didn't respond right away. They walked in silence for a moment, weaving through the crowd, Mia skipping a few steps ahead. Finally, Vivian said, I'm not most people. Adrian looked at her, trying to figure out if she meant that the way it sounded. But before he could ask, Mia came running back, tugging on his sleeve. Daddy, can we get flowers? The purple ones? We don't need flowers, Bug. But they're so pretty. Vivian crouched down so she was at Mia's eye level. You know what? I think your dad's right. You don't need them. She paused, her eyes sparkling. But I do. Want to help me pick some out? Mia's face lit up. Really? Really. They spent the next 10 minutes at the flower stand, Mia carefully selecting a bouquet of purple and white blooms while Vivian asked her about her favorite colors and whether she liked sunflowers or roses better. Adrian stood back and watched, something tight and uncomfortable settling in his chest. He wasn't used to this. To someone paying attention to his daughter like she mattered, to someone showing up and not expecting anything in return. When they finally walked away from the stand, Vivian handed the bouquet to Mia. These are for you, to brighten up your room. Mia's eyes went huge. For me? For you. Thank you. Mia threw her arms around Vivian's legs, squeezing tight. Vivian looked startled for half a second, then her expression softened, and she rested a hand gently on Mia's head. You're welcome, sweetheart. Adrian's throat felt tight. He cleared it and looked away, pretending to be interested in a stand selling homemade jam. They spent the next hour wandering through the market. Vivian bought the apple cider donuts she'd promised, warm, sugary, and so good that Mia declared them the best thing she'd ever eaten. They tried samples of honey and cheese, watched a street performer juggle fire, and sat on a bench overlooking the water while Mia fed pieces of her donut to the seagulls. "She's great," Vivian said, watching Mia laugh as the birds swarmed around her. "Yeah," Adrian said, "she is." "How long have you been raising her on your own?" Adrian hesitated. It wasn't a question he liked answering. "Since she was 2. "That's a long time." "Yeah." Vivian didn't push. She just sat there, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, her gaze steady on the water. After a moment, she said, "My mom raised me alone. My dad left when I was 3. I don't remember him." Adrian looked at her, surprised. "That must have been hard." "It was," Vivian said quietly, "but she made it work. She always made it work." She paused. "She died when I was 22. "I'm sorry." Vivian nodded, her jaw tight. "Me too." They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the gulls and the distant music filling the space between them. Finally, Adrian said, "Why are you doing this?" Vivian turned to look at him. "Doing what?" "This. All of it. The coffee, the market, the flowers. You don't know me." "I'm trying to," Vivian said simply. "But why?" She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then she said, "Because when I saw you that night, I saw someone who was just trying to get home, someone who didn't deserve what happened to him, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." She looked away. "I spend most of my life around people who want something from me. Money, connections, favors. You didn't even know who I was. You were just real." Adrian didn't know what to say to that. Mia came running back, out of breath and grinning. "Daddy, can we come back next week?" Adrian glanced at Vivian. She was watching him, waiting. "Maybe," he said. Mia seemed satisfied with that. She climbed up onto the bench between them and leaned against Adrian's side, her flowers clutched in her lap. Vivian smiled. "I'd like that." The weeks that followed were strange and disorienting in a way Adrian couldn't quite name. Vivian started texting him. Not every day, but often enough that her name stopped feeling unfamiliar on his phone screen. She'd send him articles she thought he'd find interesting, or pictures of things she saw that made her think of him. A food truck selling empanadas, a dog wearing a raincoat, small, random things that shouldn't have meant anything but somehow did. And then she started showing up, not in an overwhelming way, not in a way that felt like she was trying to insert herself into his life without permission. But she'd suggest coffee on a Sunday morning or ask if he wanted to grab lunch on his day off. And every time, Adrian found himself saying yes, even though part of him knew he should probably stop. The problem was, he didn't want to stop. Talking to Vivian was easy in a way that talking to most people wasn't. She didn't treat him like he was fragile or like his life was something to be pitied. She asked him real questions and listened to his answers like they mattered. And when he asked her about her own life, about the company she ran, the pressure she was under, the impossible expectations everyone seemed to have for her, she didn't brush him off or change the subject. She told him the truth. "I'm exhausted," she said one afternoon, sitting across from him at the same coffee shop where they'd first met. "All the time. Even when I'm sleeping, I'm thinking about work, about what needs to be done next, about what could go wrong." "That sounds miserable," Adrian said. "It is," Vivian admitted, "but I don't know how to stop." "Have you tried?" She laughed, but it was bitter. "Once. I took a week off last year, went to a cabin in the mountains. No phone, no internet, nothing." She shook her head. "I lasted 2 days before I drove back to the city. I couldn't handle it. The quiet made me feel like I was going to crawl out of my skin." Adrian studied her. "You're scared of slowing down." Vivian looked at him, something vulnerable flashing across her face. "Yeah, I am." "Why?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Because if I slow down, I have to think about things I don't want to think about." "Like what?" "Like whether any of this actually matters," she said softly. "Like whether I'm building something real or just filling space." Adrian didn't have an answer for that. He reached across the table and rested his hand over hers. She looked down at their hands, her expression unreadable. Then she turned her palm up and laced her fingers through his. They sat like that for a long time, neither of them speaking. It was Mia who finally forced Adrian to admit that something was happening. They were sitting at the kitchen table one evening, finishing dinner, when she looked up from her macaroni and said, "I like Vivian." Adrian paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Yeah? Yeah. She's nice, and she buys me flowers." "She did that once," Adrian said. "She should do it again," Mia said matter-of-factly. "Is she going to come over for dinner sometime?" Adrian set his fork down. "I don't know, Bug. Maybe." "You should ask her. It's not that simple." Mia frowned. "Why not?" "Because—" Adrian trailed off, realizing he didn't have a good answer. "Because she's busy." "She's always texting you," Mia pointed out. "She can't be that busy." Adrian sighed. "Eat your dinner." But that night, after Mia was asleep, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling and couldn't stop thinking about it. He liked Vivian, more than liked her, and that scared the hell out of him, because people didn't stay. Not in his experience. His ex had left when Mia was a toddler, disappearing one morning with nothing but a note saying she couldn't do it anymore. His parents had written him off years ago when he'd refused to follow the path they'd laid out for him. Even his friends had drifted away over time, unable to relate to a guy whose entire life revolved around his kid. Everyone left eventually. And Vivian, brilliant, successful, untouchable Vivian, would leave too. She'd realized that his life was too small, too complicated, too damn exhausting. And when she did, it wouldn't just be him who got hurt. It would be Mia. And he couldn't let that happen. So the next time Vivian texted him, asking if he wanted to meet up, Adrian hesitated. Then he typed, "I don't think that's a good idea." The response took longer than usual. When it came, it was just 2 words. "Why not?" Adrian stared at the screen, his chest tight. "Because this isn't going anywhere." Another long pause. Then, "Can we talk? In person?" Adrian closed his eyes. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to say no, to end this before it got worse. But he typed, "Okay." They met at a park near Adrian's apartment. It was late afternoon, the sun low and golden, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Vivian was already there when he arrived, sitting on a bench near the playground, her coat pulled tight around her. Adrian sat down beside her, leaving space between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Vivian said, "Talk to me." Adrian looked down at his hands. "I like you. I do. But I can't do this." "Why not?" "Because it's not fair to Mia," he said quietly. "She's already getting attached to you. And when you realize that this," he gestured vaguely between them, "isn't what you want, she's the one who's going to get hurt." Vivian's jaw tightened. "What makes you think I'm going to leave?" "Because everyone does," Adrian said, and his voice cracked just a little. "That's just how it works." Vivian turned to face him fully, her eyes fierce. "I'm not everyone." "You say that now." "I mean it," she said, cutting him off. "I don't do things halfway, Adrian. I don't show up in people's lives just to disappear when it gets complicated." She reached out and took his hand, holding it tight. "I know you've been hurt. I know you have every reason not to trust this, but I'm asking you to try." Adrian looked at her, his throat tight. "What if you're wrong? What if this doesn't work?" "Then we deal with it," Vivian said. "Together." "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she admitted. "But it's worth trying, isn't it?" Adrian wanted to say no, wanted to protect himself, protect Mia, protect the fragile balance he'd worked so hard to build. But when he looked at Vivian, at the honesty in her eyes, the quiet determination in the set of her jaw, he couldn't. "Yeah," he said finally. "It is." Vivian smiled, and it was the first real, unguarded smile he'd seen from her. She leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, like she was asking a question. And when Adrian kissed her back, it felt like an answer. When they finally pulled apart, Vivian rested her forehead against his. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Adrian closed his eyes and let himself believe her. The first time Vivian came to Adrian's apartment, she stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking it in. It was small, cramped, the kind of place where you could stand in the kitchen and see the living room and the hallway all at once. The furniture was old, mismatched, held together by necessity rather than design. But it was clean, organized, and everywhere Adrian looked there were signs of Mia, her drawings taped to the fridge, her toys in a basket by the couch, her sneakers by the door. Vivian smiled. "It's perfect," Adrian snorted. "You don't have to lie." "I'm not," Vivian said, stepping inside. "It feels like a home." Mia came running out of her room, skidding to a stop when she saw Vivian. "You came!" "I did," Vivian said, crouching down. "I brought you something." She pulled a small package out of her bag and handed it to Mia. The girl tore into it with the kind of enthusiasm only a 6-year-old could muster, and when she pulled out a set of colored pencils and a sketchbook, her eyes went huge. "Thank you!" Mia threw her arms around Vivian's neck. Vivian hugged her back, her eyes suspiciously bright. "You're welcome." Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Mia talked nonstop, asking Vivian 1,000 questions about everything from her favorite animal to whether she'd ever been to space. Vivian answered every single one with patience and humor, and by the end of the night, Mia was sitting in her lap, showing her drawings and narrating elaborate stories about princesses and dragons. Adrian watched from the kitchen, his chest tight with something he couldn't quite name. Later, after Mia had gone to bed, Vivian stayed. They sat on the couch together, the TV on low in the background, and Adrian felt something inside him start to unclench. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For this. For showing up. For not running." Vivian looked at him, her expression soft. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in a long time, Adrian let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, she meant it. The cracks started small. It was 3 weeks after that first dinner at Adrian's apartment, and things between them had settled into something that felt almost normal. Vivian came over twice a week, sometimes more. She'd bring takeout or groceries, help Mia with her homework, sit with Adrian on the couch after his daughter went to bed, and just talk. About work, about life, about nothing in particular. It should have been perfect, but Adrian could feel the weight of it building. The gap between their worlds wasn't something either of them talked about, but it was there, constant and undeniable, like a low hum in the background that never quite went away. It started with small things. The way Vivian would glance at her phone during dinner, her brow furrowing at an email she couldn't ignore. The way she'd mention a business trip to New York or Seattle like it was nothing, like hopping on a plane for 3 days was as simple as driving to the grocery store. The way she'd offer to pay for things, casually, kindly, and Adrian would have to swallow his pride and say no because accepting felt like admitting he couldn't provide. He knew she didn't mean anything by it. She was just being herself. But every time it happened, Adrian felt a little smaller. And then there was the night she invited him to a company event. They were sitting on his couch, Mia asleep in the next room, when Vivian brought it up. "There's this thing next Friday," she said, her tone careful. "A gala. It's for the company, investors, board members, that kind of crowd." Adrian looked at her. "Okay. I was wondering if you'd come with me." Adrian blinked. "To the gala?" "Yeah." "Why?" Vivian smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Because I want you there. Because I don't want to go alone." Adrian felt his stomach tighten. "Vivian, I'm not that guy." "What guy?" "The guy who goes to galas," Adrian said. "I don't own a suit. I don't know how to talk to investors. I'd just be—" "You'd be with me," Vivian interrupted. "That's all that matters." Adrian shook his head. "You don't get it. Those people are going to look at me and know I don't belong there. And then they're going to look at you and wonder what the hell you're doing with someone like me." "I don't care what they think," Vivian said firmly. "Maybe you should," Adrian said quietly. Vivian's jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you have a reputation to protect, a company to run. And showing up with some warehouse worker who can barely make rent isn't going to do you any favors." "Don't do that," Vivian said, her voice sharp now. "Don't talk about yourself like that." "I'm just being realistic." "No, you're being scared," Vivian shot back. "And I get it, Adrian, I do. But you can't keep hiding behind this idea that you're not good enough. It's bullshit." Adrian stood up, his chest tight. "I'm not hiding. I'm protecting you." "From what?" "From the damage I could do to your life," Adrian said, and his voice cracked just a little. You don't see it because you're in the middle of it, but everyone else will. They'll see a single dad with no money, no connections, nothing to offer, and they'll tear you apart for it. Vivian stood too, her eyes blazing. So what? You want to break up over hypothetical gossip? I want you to think about what you're risking, Adrian said. I have thought about it, Vivian said, and I'm still here. They stood there in the dim light of the living room, the tension between them thick enough to choke on. Finally, Adrian said, I can't go to that gala. I'm sorry. Vivian's expression shifted, something hurt flickering across her face. Fine. She grabbed her coat and walked to the door. Adrian followed her, his stomach churning. Vivian, I'll call you later, she said without looking back. And then she was gone. Adrian stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty hallway, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Vivian went to the gala alone. She wore a black dress that cost more than most people's cars, smiled at all the right people, and said all the right things. But the whole night felt hollow. Every conversation was a performance. Every laugh was forced. And every time someone asked where her date was, she felt the question like a knife. By the time she got home, it was past midnight. She kicked off her heels, poured herself a glass of wine she didn't drink, and sat on her couch staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Adrian. I'm sorry. Vivian stared at it for a long time. Then she typed back, Me too. Another pause, then, Can we talk tomorrow? Yeah. Vivian set the phone down and closed her eyes. She didn't know how to fix this. Didn't know how to make Adrian see that she didn't care about the gap between their worlds, that the only thing that mattered was him. But she was starting to realize that maybe caring wasn't enough. They met the next day at the park where they'd had their first real conversation. It was cold, the sky heavy with clouds, the kind of day that felt like it was holding its breath. Adrian was already there when Vivian arrived, sitting on the same bench, his hands shoved in his jacket pockets. Vivian sat down beside him, leaving a little space between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Adrian said, I was an ass last night. Yeah, Vivian said, you were. I'm sorry. Vivian looked at him. Why did you say no? Adrian let out a long breath. Because I'm terrified, Vivian, of screwing this up, of dragging you down, of not being enough. You are enough, Vivian said quietly. You say that, Adrian said, but you don't know what it's like. To feel like you're always one step behind. To watch someone you care about move through a world you'll never be part of, and know that eventually they're going to realize you don't fit. Vivian's chest tightened. You think I'm going to leave you? I think it's inevitable, Adrian said, and his voice was raw. Not because you want to, but because it's going to get too hard, too complicated. And one day you're going to wake up and realize that being with me isn't worth the cost. Vivian felt something crack inside her. You don't get to decide that for me. I'm not deciding anything, Adrian said. I'm just preparing for it. By pushing me away? Adrian didn't answer. Vivian turned to face him fully, her eyes burning. You want to know what scared me about that gala? It wasn't showing up alone. It was standing there in a room full of people who wanted something from me and realizing that none of it mattered, that the only person I actually wanted to be there with was you. And you weren't there because you didn't think you were good enough. Adrian looked at her, his throat tight. I'm not perfect, Adrian, Vivian continued, her voice shaking. I'm exhausted. I'm lonely. I spend most of my life pretending I have it together when I don't. And the only time I don't feel like I'm drowning is when I'm with you. So don't tell me you're not enough, because you're the only thing that feels real. Adrian's breath hitched. He reached out and took her hand, holding it tight. I'm sorry, he said again, and this time it sounded like he meant it all the way through. Vivian squeezed his hand. I need you to stop waiting for me to leave, because I'm not going to. I'm trying, Adrian said quietly. It's just hard. I know, Vivian said, but we have to try together, okay? Adrian nodded. Okay. They sat there for a long time, their hands clasped, the cold air biting at their skin. Finally, Vivian said, Will you come to the next one, the next event? Adrian hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I will. Vivian smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd managed in days. Thank you. But even as they sat there, something had shifted. The fear hadn't gone away. It had just moved, settling into a different shape, waiting. The trouble started at work. Vivian had always been careful to keep her personal life separate from the company. She didn't talk about Adrian in meetings, didn't post about him on social media, didn't bring him to the office. But somehow, word got out anyway. It started with whispers in the hallways, glances that lasted a little too long. And then, one morning, her CFO walked into her office and closed the door behind him. Richard Ton was a man in his 50s, sharp as a blade and twice as cold. He'd been with the company since the beginning, and Vivian trusted his judgment even when she didn't like it. "We need to talk," Richard said, sitting down across from her. Vivian looked up from her laptop. "About?" "About the rumors." Vivian's stomach dropped. "What rumors?" Richard gave her a look that said they both knew exactly what he was talking about. "People are saying you're seeing someone. A single father, works in a warehouse." Vivian's jaw tightened. "And?" "And it's creating questions," Richard said, "about your judgment, about your priorities." "My personal life has nothing to do with my ability to run this company," Vivian said sharply. "I agree," Richard said, but the board doesn't see it that way. They're concerned." "Concerned about what?" "About optics," Richard said bluntly. "You're the face of this company, Vivian. Everything you do reflects on us. And dating someone who's," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "outside the usual circles raises questions." "Questions like what?" Vivian's voice was ice. "Questions about whether you're distracted, whether your priorities are shifting, whether this is going to affect your performance." Vivian stood up, her hands flat on the desk. "I have built this company from the ground up. I have worked 80-hour weeks, sacrificed everything, and delivered results every single quarter. My personal life is my business, and if anyone on the board has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." Richard held up his hands. "I'm not the enemy here, Vivian. I'm just telling you what's being said." "Then tell them to mind their own business," Vivian said. Richard sighed. "It's not that simple. You know that." Vivian sat back down, her chest tight with anger and something that felt uncomfortably close to fear. "What do they want me to do?" "They want you to be careful," Richard said. "That's all. Just careful." After he left, Vivian sat alone in her office, staring out the window at the city below. She'd known this would happen eventually. Had known that the moment people found out about Adrian, the questions would start, but she hadn't expected it to feel like this. Like she was being asked to choose between her work and her life. Her phone buzzed. A text from Adrian. "How's your day going?" Vivian stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Long, I'll tell you later." She didn't tell him. Not that night, and not the next day either. Because part of her was afraid that if she did, he'd take it as confirmation of everything he'd already believed. That she was better off without him. That being with him was costing her too much. And she couldn't let him believe that. But the pressure didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. 2 weeks later, an article appeared in a business magazine. It was a profile piece on Vivian, celebrating her success as one of the youngest CEOs in the industry. But buried in the middle was a paragraph about her personal life, speculating about her relationship with an unnamed man described only as a working-class single father. The comments section exploded. Some people defended her, said her personal life was nobody's business, but others were vicious. They questioned her judgment, her professionalism, whether she was thinking clearly. One comment called Adrian a gold digger. Another said Vivian was slumming it for attention. Vivian read every single comment, her stomach twisting tighter with each one. And then she made the mistake of showing Adrian. They were at her apartment, sitting on the couch with takeout containers spread across the coffee table. Adrian had just finished telling Mia a story over FaceTime, and Vivian had been scrolling through her phone, trying to decide whether to say anything. Finally, she handed him the phone. "You should see this." Adrian read the article in silence. Then he scrolled through the comments, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. "This is what I was afraid of." "It's just noise," Vivian said quickly. "It doesn't mean anything." "It means people think I'm using you," Adrian said. "It means they think you're making a mistake." "I don't care what they think." "You should," Adrian said, and his voice was hollow. "Because they're right." "Adrian, no, listen to me," Adrian said, setting the phone down. I'm dragging you down. I knew it would happen, and it's happening, and it's only going to get worse. Stop it, Vivian said, her voice sharp. You're not dragging me down. Then what do you call this? Adrian gestured at the phone. People questioning your judgment. Your board breathing down your neck. How long before this actually starts affecting your company? It won't. You don't know that, Adrian said. He stood up, running a hand through his hair. I can't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. You're not, Vivian said, standing too. Adrian, please, don't do this. But he was already pulling on his jacket, his jaw set. I need to think. About what? About whether this is fair to you, Adrian said quietly. About whether I'm being selfish by staying. Vivian felt panic rising in her chest. Don't leave. Not like this. Adrian looked at her, and for a moment she thought he might stay. But then he shook his head. I'll call you tomorrow. Adrian! The door closed behind him. Vivian stood in the middle of her apartment, the takeout containers still scattered across the table, and felt the world tilt sideways. Adrian didn't call the next day, or the day after that. Vivian texted him 3 times, each message more desperate than the last. But all she got back was silence. By the 4th day, she was furious. At him for running, at herself for letting him. At the whole damn world for making something that should have been simple so impossibly complicated. She threw herself into work, staying at the office until midnight, burying herself in spreadsheets and strategy meetings, and anything that would keep her mind from spiraling. But it didn't help. Because every time she looked at her phone and saw no new messages, the anger turned into something worse. Fear. On the 5th day she showed up at his apartment. Adrian opened the door looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair a mess, his shirt wrinkled. Vivian, don't, she said, pushing past him into the apartment. Don't you dare tell me you need more time to think. Adrian closed the door slowly. I was going to call you. When? Next week? Next month? Vivian spun to face him, her voice shaking. You don't get to just disappear, Adrian, not after everything. I wasn't disappearing, Adrian said. I was trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. The right thing? Vivian laughed, but it was bitter. The right thing is to talk to me. To let me be part of the decision, not to shut me out and decide on your own that this isn't working. I'm trying to protect you, Adrian said, his voice rising. Can't you see that? I don't need you to protect me, Vivian shouted. I need you to trust me, to believe me when I say that I'm not going anywhere. How can I trust that when everything around us is falling apart? Adrian shouted back. When people are calling me a gold digger and questioning your judgment and making you choose between me and your career? I'm not choosing, Vivian said, her voice breaking. I don't have to choose. I can have both. Can you? Adrian asked, and the question hung in the air between them like a blade. Vivian stared at him, her chest heaving. Do you want to break up? Is that what this is? Adrian looked away. I don't know. Yes, you do, Vivian said, her voice shaking. You've already decided. You're just too scared to say it. I'm scared of ruining your life, Adrian said, and his voice cracked. I'm scared that if I stay, you're going to lose everything, and I can't live with that. So you're going to leave instead, Vivian said quietly. And I'm supposed to just accept that? Adrian didn't answer. Vivian felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. You told me you'd try. You promised me we'd figure this out together, and the first time things get hard, you run. That's not fair, Adrian said. Isn't it? Vivian's voice was raw now. You talk about protecting me, but all you're doing is protecting yourself. Because if you leave first, you don't have to deal with the possibility that I might actually stay. Adrian flinched like she'd hit him. Vivian wiped at her eyes angrily. I love you, Adrian. I'm in love with you, and I know that scares you. But you don't get to decide for me whether that's worth fighting for. Adrian looked at her, his eyes wide and wet. You love me? Of course I do, you idiot, Vivian said, her voice breaking. Why else would I be here? Adrian's face crumpled. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight it hurt. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry. Vivian clung to him, her fingers digging into his shirt. Don't leave me, please. I won't, Adrian said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I swear I won't." They stood there in the middle of his living room, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in a world that had gone sideways. Finally, Adrian pulled back just enough to look at her. "I love you too. I should have said it sooner." Vivian let out a shaky laugh, tears streaming down her face. "Yeah, you should have." Adrian kissed her then, soft and desperate, and full of everything he couldn't say. And when they finally broke apart, Vivian rested her forehead against his. "We're going to figure this out," she said. "Together. No more running." "No more running," Adrian agreed. But even as they stood there, wrapped in each other, the fear hadn't gone away. It was still there waiting, because the world outside wasn't going to get easier. The questions weren't going to stop, and eventually they were going to have to face the fact that loving each other might not be enough. The decision to stop hiding came 2 weeks later, and it wasn't planned. Adrian had finally agreed to attend one of Vivian's company events, a smaller gathering this time, a dinner for key investors and board members at an upscale restaurant downtown. He'd borrowed a suit from his brother-in-law, spent 20 minutes in front of the mirror trying to get his tie right, and shown up with his stomach in knots. Vivian met him outside the restaurant, and the moment she saw him, her whole face softened. "You look good," she said. Adrian tugged at his collar. "I look like I'm playing dress-up." "You look like you belong here," Vivian said firmly. She took his hand and squeezed it. "Ready?" "No," Adrian admitted, "but let's do it anyway." The dinner was exactly what Adrian had feared, a room full of people in expensive clothes, speaking a language he only half understood, talk of acquisitions and quarterly projections and market positioning. He sat beside Vivian, trying to follow along, nodding at the right moments, and feeling more out of place with every passing minute. But Vivian never left his side. She introduced him to everyone with a quiet pride that made his chest ache. She included him in conversations, asked his opinion on things, made it clear without saying a word that he mattered to her. And for a while, it was almost okay. Then Richard Tan showed up. Adrian had heard about him from Vivian, the CFO who'd warned her about optics, about being careful. He was a lean man with silver hair and a sharp suit, and when he saw Adrian sitting next to Vivian, something flickered across his face. He made his way over during the dessert course, a glass of wine in hand. "Vivian," he said smoothly. "Good to see you." "Richard," Vivian said, her tone polite but cool. "This is Adrian Cole." Richard extended a hand. "Nice to meet you." Adrian shook it. "You too." "So you're the one everyone's been talking about," Richard said, and his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Adrian felt his stomach tighten. "I guess so." "It's certainly interesting," Richard continued. "Vivian's always been so focused on the company. It's good to see her branching out." "Richard," Vivian said, her voice edged with warning, but Richard wasn't done. "I have to say, though, it's raised some questions about priorities, about where her focus is these days." "My focus hasn't changed," Vivian said sharply, "and this isn't the place for this conversation." "Of course not," Richard said, still smiling. "I'm just saying what others are thinking. Better you hear it from me than from the board." Adrian's jaw tightened. He could feel the eyes of other people at the table turning toward them, the conversation around them going quiet. "With all due respect," Adrian said, his voice low and steady, "Vivian's personal life is none of your business, or the board's." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Yeah," Adrian said. "It is. She's the best CEO you've got, and if you can't see that because you're too busy judging who she's dating, that's your problem, not hers." The table went completely silent. Richard's smile faded. "You don't know anything about running a company." "You're right," Adrian said. "I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone's working themselves to death trying to prove they're good enough. And I know that Vivian's done more for this company than anyone else in this room. So maybe instead of questioning her judgment, you should be thanking her." Vivian was staring at him, her eyes wide. Richard set his glass down slowly. "Well," he said, his tone icy, "that's certainly an opinion." He walked away without another word. Adrian let out a shaky breath, his heart pounding. Around them, conversation slowly started up again, but he could still feel people watching, whispering. "Adrian," Vivian said quietly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize," Vivian interrupted. She was smiling now, and her eyes were bright. That was the best thing anyone said to me in months. Adrian looked at her surprised. Really? Really? Vivian said. She leaned in and kissed him, right there in front of everyone. Thank you. When they left the restaurant an hour later, Adrian expected Vivian to be angry, expected her to tell him he'd overstepped, that he'd made things worse. Instead, she laughed. They were standing on the sidewalk waiting for a cab, and Vivian just started laughing, deep, genuine laughter that made her lean against him for support. What? Adrian said, confused. Did you see Richard's face? Vivian said between laughs. I've never seen him speechless before. Adrian cracked a smile. I probably shouldn't have done that. Probably not, Vivian agreed, but I'm so glad you did. The cab pulled up, and they climbed in. As it drove through the city streets, Vivian rested her head on Adrian's shoulder. I'm tired of hiding, she said quietly. What do you mean? I mean, I'm tired of pretending like this is something to be ashamed of, Vivian said. Like loving you is a mistake. I don't want to do that anymore. Adrian's throat tightened. Vivian, if we go public, really public, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I know, Vivian said, but I don't care. I'm done letting other people decide what my life should look like. Adrian looked down at her, his chest tight with something that felt like hope and fear tangled together. You're sure? I'm sure, Vivian said. She looked up at him, her eyes steady. Are you? Adrian thought about it. Thought about the whispers, the judgment, the inevitable scrutiny. Thought about Mia and whether dragging her into this was fair. Thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Then he thought about Vivian, about the way she looked at him like he mattered, about the way she'd made space in her life for him and his daughter without hesitation, about the way she fought for him even when he was too scared to fight for himself. Yeah, he said finally. I'm sure. Vivian smiled and kissed him again, softer this time. Then let's do this right. The next morning, Vivian called an emergency meeting with her executive team. Richard was there, along with the head of PR, the COO, and 2 senior board members. They sat around the conference table, clearly confused about why they'd been summoned on a Saturday. Vivian stood at the head of the table, her hands resting on the back of a chair, her expression calm and determined. I wanted to address something that's been circulating, she said. The rumors about my personal life. Richard shifted in his seat. Vivian, I don't think... I'm in a relationship, Vivian continued, cutting him off, with a man named Adrian Cole. He's a single father. He works in a warehouse, and I love him. The room went very still. I'm not interested in hiding it, Vivian said, and I'm not interested in having conversations about whether it's appropriate or professional or good for the company's image. It's my life, and it's none of your business. With all due respect, one of the board members said carefully, your personal choices do affect the company's reputation. Then let me be clear, Vivian said, her voice sharp. If the company's reputation depends on me being single or dating someone you approve of, then you've built it on the wrong foundation. My value to this company is the work I do, the results I deliver, and nothing about my relationship changes that. People will talk, Richard said. Let them, Vivian said. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not just to make other people comfortable. If the board has a problem with that, they can find a new CEO. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, the COO, a woman in her 40s named Janet, who'd always been one of Vivian's strongest allies, spoke up. For what it's worth, Janet said, I think you're right. Your personal life is your business, and anyone who can't separate that from your professional performance isn't paying attention. One of the board members nodded slowly. I agree, but we need to be prepared for the fallout. The media, the investors. I'll handle it, Vivian said. I'll do an interview, put it on the record, control the narrative before someone else does. Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. You're really willing to risk everything for this? Vivian looked him dead in the eye. I'm not risking anything. I'm finally living my life. There's a difference. The interview ran 2 weeks later in a major business publication. It was framed as a profile on Vivian's leadership style, but halfway through, the interviewer asked about her relationship. And Vivian didn't dodge the question. Yes, I'm in a relationship, she said. His name is Adrian. He's a single father, and he works incredibly hard to provide for his daughter. He's one of the most honest, grounded people I've ever met. And yes, our lives are different, but that's part of what makes it work. There's been some criticism, the interviewer said carefully. People questioning whether it's appropriate for someone in your position. Vivian smiled, but there was steel in it. I think it's interesting that no one questions a male CEO's personal life the same way they question mine. No one asks if he's distracted or if his girlfriend is using him. But because I'm a woman, suddenly my personal choices are up for public debate. So you don't think it affects your work? I think my work speaks for itself, Vivian said. And if people want to focus on who I'm dating instead of the company I've built, that says more about them than it does about me. The article went viral. Some people praised her for being honest. Others tore her apart. The comments section was a war zone, split between people who thought she was brave and people who thought she was reckless. Adrian read it sitting in his apartment, his phone in his hand, his stomach churning. Mia was at a friend's house for a play date, and the silence around him felt too loud. He scrolled through the comments, his chest tightening with every cruel word, every judgment, every person who thought they knew him well enough to call him a leech or a distraction or worse. His phone rang. It was Vivian. "Did you see it?" she asked. "Yeah," Adrian said quietly. And I don't know if this was a good idea." There was a pause. "Do you regret it?" Adrian closed his eyes. "I regret that you're getting torn apart because of me." "I'm getting torn apart because people are assholes," Vivian said, "not because of you." "It's the same thing." "It's not," Vivian said firmly. "Adrian, listen to me. I knew this would happen. I chose to do it anyway, because I'd rather deal with strangers judging me than spend the rest of my life hiding the person I love." Adrian's throat tightened. "You really don't regret it?" "Not for a second," Vivian said. "Do you?" Adrian thought about it, about the fear, the judgment, the weight of it all. But then he thought about Vivian standing in front of her board and refusing to apologize, about her telling the world she loved him without flinching. "No," he said finally, "I don't." "Good," Vivian said. "Then stop reading the comments. They don't matter." "Easy for you to say," Adrian muttered. "It's not easy," Vivian said, "but it's true." They talked for another hour, about nothing and everything. And by the time they hung up, Adrian felt a little steadier. But the comments didn't stop, and neither did the pressure. 3 days after the article, Adrian's supervisor called him into the office at work. Carl Jennings was a man in his 50s with a permanent scowl and a clipboard that never left his hand. He ran the warehouse like a drill sergeant, and Adrian had always kept his head down and stayed out of his way. But now Carl was looking at him like he was a problem that needed solving. "Sit down," Carl said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Adrian sat, his stomach sinking. "What's this about?" "You tell me," Carl said. He turned his computer screen around. It was open to the article about Vivian. "This you?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Yeah." "You dating that CEO?" "Yeah." Carl let out a long breath. "Jesus, Adrian." "What? Do you have any idea how many reporters have been sniffing around here?" Carl said. 3 different people called this week asking about you. One of them showed up at the loading dock trying to get interviews with your coworkers." Adrian's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry. I don't care if you're sorry," Carl interrupted. "I care that you're turning this place into a circus. We've got work to do, and I can't have people distracted because they're trying to figure out if you're going to show up with cameras following you." "That's not going to happen," Adrian said. "How do you know?" Carl shot back. "You think this is going to blow over? People are talking, Adrian, and not just here. Customers, vendors, everyone knows. And it's making us look bad." Adrian felt anger rising in his chest. "Making you look bad? How?" "Because they think we're a stepping stone," Carl said bluntly. "That you're just here until your rich girlfriend decides to take care of you." Adrian stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "That's bullshit." "Maybe," Carl said. "But it's what people think, and I can't have that hanging over this place." "So what are you saying?" Adrian's voice was tight. "You're firing me?" Carl hesitated. "I'm saying maybe it's time you found something else. Somewhere that's not going to be under a microscope because of who you're sleeping with." Adrian stared at him, his heart pounding. "You can't fire me for this." "I'm not firing you," Carl said. "I'm suggesting that you make a choice, for everyone's sake." Adrian walked out of the office without another word. He made it to his car before the anger turned into something else. He sat in the driver's seat, his hands shaking, his chest tight, and tried to breathe. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. The judgment, the scrutiny, the way his life was being picked apart and examined and found wanting. And now it was costing him his job. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "How's your day?" Adrian stared at it for a long time. Then he typed back, "Can we talk tonight?" "Of course." "What's wrong?" "I'll tell you later." When Vivian showed up at his apartment that evening, Adrian had already picked Mia up from school, fed her dinner, and put her to bed early. He was sitting on the couch staring at nothing when Vivian walked in. She took one look at his face and sat down beside him. "What happened?" Adrian told her. About Carl, about the reporters, about the suggestion that he quit before things got worse. Vivian's expression darkened. "He can't do that."
"He can suggest it," Adrian said bitterly. "And if I don't take the hint, he'll find another reason to let me go. That's how it works." "Then we'll fight it," Vivian said. "We'll get a lawyer." "With what money?" Adrian interrupted. "I can't afford a lawyer, Vivian. And even if I could, do you really think it would matter? They'll just say it was performance-related or some other bullshit, and I'll still be out of a job." Vivian's jaw tightened. "So what do you want to do?" "I don't know," Adrian said, and his voice cracked. "I don't know anymore." Vivian reached out and took his hand. "We'll figure it out." "How?" Adrian said. "How do we figure this out when everything is falling apart? When people are tearing you down and I'm losing my job and none of this is getting any easier?" "Because we don't give up," Vivian said firmly. "Because we keep fighting." "Fighting for what?" Adrian said, and he sounded tired. "For the chance to keep getting judged? For the chance to keep watching our lives get picked apart?" "For each other," Vivian said. "For the life we're trying to build." Adrian looked at her, his eyes red. "What if it's not enough?" "It is," Vivian said. "It has to be." They sat there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on them. Finally, Adrian said, "I'm scared, Vivian." "I know," Vivian said softly. "Me too." "But you're still here." "I'm still here," Vivian said, "and I'm not going anywhere." Adrian leaned into her and she wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight. Outside, the city hummed with noise and life. But in that small apartment, with the world trying to tear them apart, they held on to each other like it was the only thing that mattered. Because maybe it was. The breaking point came a week later, and it wasn't what either of them expected. Adrian had started looking for new jobs, sending out applications to warehouses and distribution centers across the city. But every interview felt like an interrogation. Managers would ask about his previous employment, then pause when they Googled his name and found the articles. Some would end the interview right there. Others would offer vague promises to be in touch that never materialized. He was running out of money. Rent was due in 2 weeks, and he had maybe half of it. Mrs. Nguyen had started giving him sympathetic looks when he picked up Mia, and he knew it was only a matter of time before she asked about the childcare payments he was behind on. He hadn't told Vivian any of this, because every time he thought about it, he could hear her offering to help, and he couldn't accept that. Wouldn't accept that. But Vivian wasn't stupid. She showed up one evening unannounced, walked past him into the kitchen, and set a bag of groceries on the counter. "I was at the store," she said casually. "Picked up some things." Adrian looked at the bag. It was full. Milk, bread, pasta, chicken, vegetables. Easily $100 worth of food. "Vivian," he said quietly. "Don't," she said, still not looking at him. "Just don't. I can't accept this." "You're not accepting anything," Vivian said, finally turning to face him. "I bought groceries. That's it." "That's not it," Adrian said. "And you know it." Vivian's expression hardened. "How much do you have in your account right now?" Adrian looked away. "Adrian," Vivian said, her voice softer now. "How much?" "Enough," he said. "Enough for what? Rent? Bills? Food?" "I'll figure it out." "When?" Vivian said, and there was frustration in her voice now. "When you get evicted? When you can't feed your daughter?" "That's not going to happen," Adrian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then let me help," Vivian said. "I can't." "Why not?"
Because if I do, then everyone's right. Adrian's voice rose. Every person who called me a gold digger, every comment that said I was using you, they'll all be right. And I can't live with that. So you'd rather starve? Vivian shot back. You'd rather let your pride destroy you? It's not about pride, Adrian said. It's about being able to look at myself in the mirror. And what do you see when you look in the mirror now? Vivian asked, her voice sharp. Someone who's winning? Because from where I'm standing, you're drowning, and you're too stubborn to grab the life preserver. Adrian felt something snap inside him. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, Vivian said. I've spent my entire life proving that I'm not worthless, Adrian said, his voice shaking, that I can take care of myself and my daughter without needing anyone. And if I take your money now, what does that make me? What does that say about everything I've been fighting for? It says you're human, Vivian said quietly. It says that sometimes we need help, and that's okay. Not for me, Adrian said. It's not okay for me. Vivian stared at him, her eyes glistening. So what happens now? You lose your apartment? You lose custody of Mia because you can't provide for her? Adrian flinched. That's not going to happen. You don't know that, Vivian said. And I'm not going to stand here and watch you destroy yourself because you're too afraid to accept that you don't have to do this alone anymore. Maybe I do, Adrian said. Maybe that's just how it is. Vivian's face crumpled. Is that really what you think? Adrian didn't answer. Vivian grabbed her purse and walked to the door. When she reached it, she stopped and turned back. I love you, she said, her voice breaking. But I can't watch you do this to yourself. So when you're ready to stop fighting me and start fighting with me, call me. Then she left. Adrian stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the groceries she'd brought, and felt the world cave in around him. He didn't call. Not that night, or the next day, or the day after that. Instead, he threw himself into the grind, applied to more jobs, picked up extra shifts at a friend's moving company, sold the TV and the coffee maker and anything else he could live without. Mia noticed. She stopped asking about Vivian after the third time Adrian changed the subject. She got quieter, more withdrawn, and that hurt worse than anything else. But Adrian kept going, because that's what he did. He survived. 2 weeks passed, then 3. And then one night, Mrs. Nguyen stopped him at the door. Adrian, she said gently, we need to talk. He knew what was coming. I'll have the money by Friday. It's not about the money, Mrs. Nguyen said. She looked at him with something like pity. It's about Mia. Adrian's stomach dropped. What about her? She's not herself, Mrs. Nguyen said. She's sad, quiet. She asked me yesterday if you were mad at her. Adrian felt like he'd been punched. What? She thinks she did something wrong, Mrs. Nguyen said. She thinks that's why Vivian stopped coming around. Adrian's chest tightened. I'll talk to her. You should, Mrs. Nguyen said. But Adrian, you should also think about what you're teaching her. What do you mean? I mean, she's watching you push away someone who loves you because you're too proud to accept help, Mrs. Nguyen said quietly. And one day, she's going to think that's what love looks like, that you have to do everything alone, that needing people makes you weak. Adrian stared at her, his throat tight. Is that what you want for her? Mrs. Nguyen asked. He didn't have an answer. That night, after Mia was asleep, Adrian sat on the edge of his bed and finally let himself break. He thought about Vivian, about the way she'd looked at him when she left, about the groceries still sitting in his kitchen that he'd been too stubborn to eat. He thought about Mia, about the way she used to light up when Vivian walked in, about the way she'd stopped asking questions and started watching him with worried eyes. And he thought about himself, about the man he was trying so hard to be, and whether that man was worth anything if he was miserable and alone. He picked up his phone and stared at Vivian's name for a long time. Then he called. She answered on the second ring. Adrian? I'm sorry, he said, and his voice broke. I'm so sorry. There was a long pause. Then Vivian said, Where are you? Home. I'm coming over. Vivian. I'm coming over, she repeated. Don't argue. She hung up. 30 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Adrian opened it, and Vivian was standing there in sweatpants and a hoodie, her hair pulled back, her eyes red like she'd been crying too. Hi, she said. Hi, Adrian said. They stood there for a moment,
just looking at each other. Then Vivian stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, and Adrian buried his face in her shoulder and finally let himself cry. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I'm so sorry." "I know," Vivian said, holding him tight. "I know."
They stood like that for a long time, holding on to each other in the doorway. Finally, Adrian pulled back just enough to look at her. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Let someone in," Adrian said. "Let someone help. I've been on my own for so long, and I don't know how to be anything else." "Then we'll figure it out," Vivian said. "Together. One day at a time." Adrian nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "But you have to let me in," Vivian said gently. "All the way. No more shutting me out when things get hard." "I'll try," Adrian said. "That's all I'm asking," Vivian said. She kissed him softly. "Now can we please go inside? It's freezing out here." Adrian laughed despite everything, and they went inside together. They stayed up talking until dawn, about the job, the money, the fear, about what came next and how they'd face it. And for the first time in weeks, Adrian felt like maybe they could actually do this. Maybe they could actually make it work. The morning after Vivian came back, Adrian woke up to find her asleep on his couch, still in her sweatpants and hoodie, one arm draped over the side and her hair falling across her face. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her breathe, and felt something settle inside him that had been restless for weeks. He made coffee quietly, trying not to wake her, but the smell must have done it because she stirred a few minutes later, blinking up at him with bleary eyes. "Morning," she mumbled. "Morning," Adrian said, handing her a mug. "You didn't have to sleep on the couch. You could have taken the bed." "And kick you out of your own bed?" Vivian sat up, wrapping her hands around the mug. "I'm not that much of an asshole." Adrian smiled despite himself. "Fair enough." They sat together in the early light, the apartment still and quiet except for the distant sound of traffic outside. Mia was still asleep, and for a little while, it was just the two of them, drinking coffee and not saying much of anything. Finally, Vivian spoke. "We need to talk about what happens next." Adrian nodded. "I know." "I meant what I said last night," Vivian continued. "I want to help, but I need you to let me. Actually, let me. Not just say you will and then shut me out the first time it gets hard." "I'm trying," Adrian said. "I really am. It's not easy for me." "I know it's not," Vivian said. "But we're not going to make it if you keep trying to do everything alone." Adrian took a breath. "Okay, so what do you want to do?" "First," Vivian said, "we deal with the immediate stuff. Rent, bills, childcare. I can cover it until you find another job." Adrian started to protest, but Vivian held up a hand. "I'm not giving you the money," she said. "I'm lending it to you. You can pay me back when you're on your feet again. But right now, Mia needs stability. And you can't give her that if you're scrambling to keep the lights on." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Alone." "Alone," Vivian confirmed, "with no interest and no timeline, just whenever you can." It still felt like charity, but Adrian forced himself to think about what Mrs. Nguyen had said, about what he was teaching his daughter, about whether his pride was worth more than her security. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. Thank you." Vivian's shoulders relaxed. "Second, we need to figure out your job situation. What do you actually want to do?" Adrian blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy working in warehouses? Is that what you want to be doing 5 years from now?" Adrian hadn't thought about it in those terms. He'd been so focused on just surviving that the idea of wanting something felt almost foreign. "I don't know. It pays the bills." "Barely," Vivian said gently, "and it's killing you. I can see it." Adrian looked down at his coffee. "I never finished college. Dropped out sophomore year when Mia was born. So my options are pretty limited." "What were you studying?" "Engineering," Adrian said. "Mechanical engineering. I was good at it too, just couldn't make it work with a kid and no support." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if you went back?" Adrian let out a short laugh. "I can't afford to go back to school, and even if I could, I don't have time. I'm working full-time, raising Mia." "What if you didn't have to work full-time?" Vivian interrupted. "What if you could go to school part-time and I helped with the costs and childcare?" Adrian stared at her. "Vivian, that's
That's too much. It's an investment, Vivian said, in your future, in our future. She leaned forward. Adrian, you're smart. You're capable. You could be doing so much more than loading trucks, and I want to help you get there. Not because I think you need saving, but because I think you deserve a chance to build the life you actually want. Adrian's throat felt tight. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Vivian said. Adrian nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Mia woke up a few minutes later and came padding into the living room, rubbing her eyes. When she saw Vivian, her whole face lit up. Vivian? She ran over and threw her arms around her. You came back! Vivian hugged her tight, her eyes going suspiciously bright. Of course I did, sweetheart. I told you I wasn't going anywhere. Daddy said you were busy, Mia said, pulling back to look at her. But I missed you. I missed you too, Vivian said softly. Mia climbed up onto the couch between them, settling in like she'd been there all along. Are you staying for breakfast? Vivian glanced at Adrian, who nodded. Yeah, Vivian said, smiling. I'm staying for breakfast. They made pancakes together. The three of them crowded into Adrian's tiny kitchen. Mia insisted on helping, which meant there was flour everywhere, and the first batch came out slightly burned, but nobody cared. They ate at the small table by the window, Mia chattering about school and her friends and a drawing she wanted to show Vivian later. And for the first time in weeks, Adrian felt like he could breathe. Over the next few weeks, things started to shift. Vivian helped Adrian apply for part-time programs at the community college, ones that offered night and weekend classes so he could still work. She also helped him negotiate a deal with Mrs. Nguyen for extended childcare hours, covering the difference without making Adrian feel like he was taking charity. Adrian found a new job at a smaller warehouse, less pay than before, but the manager didn't care about his personal life, and the hours were flexible enough to make school work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start, and slowly, carefully, Adrian let Vivian into the parts of his life he'd always kept walled off. She started keeping a toothbrush at his apartment, started picking Mia up from school sometimes when Adrian had class, started being part of their routine in a way that felt less like an intrusion and more like she'd always been there. But it wasn't easy. There were still hard days. Days when Adrian felt like he was drowning in homework and exhaustion. Days when Vivian's work consumed her and she couldn't be there the way she wanted to be. Days when they snapped at each other over stupid things because they were both running on empty. One night, about 2 months in, they had their worst fight yet. Adrian had just gotten home from an exam he was pretty sure he'd failed. He was tired, hungry, and in no mood for company, but when he walked in, Vivian was already there, sitting on the couch with Mia, helping her with a school project. Hey, Vivian said, looking up. How'd it go? Fine, Adrian said shortly. Vivian frowned. You okay? I'm fine, Adrian repeated. Where's dinner? I ordered pizza, Vivian said. It should be here soon. Adrian felt irritation spike. I was going to cook. You just got out of an exam, Vivian said. I figured you'd be tired. So you just decided for me? Adrian's voice came out sharper than he intended. Without asking, Vivian's expression hardened. I was trying to help. I didn't ask for help, Adrian said. Daddy? Mia said quietly, looking between them with worried eyes. Adrian forced himself to take a breath. Mia, go to your room for a minute, okay? Mia looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his tone made her listen. She gathered up her project and disappeared down the hall. The moment she was gone, Vivian stood up. What the hell was that? I'm just tired, Adrian said. No, you're being an ass, Vivian shot back. I ordered pizza because I thought it would help, not because I was trying to take over your life. It feels like that sometimes, Adrian said before he could stop himself. Vivian looked like he'd slapped her. What? Adrian ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I'm sorry, I didn't mean… No, say it, Vivian interrupted. If that's how you feel, say it. Adrian let out a harsh breath. Sometimes it feels like you're trying to fix everything, like you think I can't handle my own life. That's not what I'm doing, Vivian said, her voice tight. Isn't it? Adrian said. The school, the childcare, the job, you're involved in all of it. And I'm grateful, I am. But sometimes I just need to feel like I'm still the one raising my daughter, like I'm still the one in control. You are in control, Vivian said. I'm just trying to support you.
It doesn't always feel like support, Adrian said quietly. Sometimes it feels like you're taking over because you don't trust me to handle it. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair. Maybe not, Adrian said, but it's how I feel. They stood there in the middle of the living room, the space between them feeling wider than it ever had. Finally, Vivian said, "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Adrian said immediately. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" Adrian sank down onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I don't know. I'm tired, Vivian, and I'm scared. Scared that I'm losing myself in all of this, that I'm becoming someone who can't function without you, and that terrifies me." Vivian sat down beside him, close but not touching. "You're not losing yourself," she said quietly. "You're just not alone anymore, and I know that's hard for you, but Adrian, letting people help you doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Adrian looked at her, his eyes red. "What if I forget how to do it on my own?" "Then we'll figure it out," Vivian said, "together. But you can't keep pushing me away every time you feel like you're losing control. That's not how partnerships work." "I know," Adrian said. "I'm sorry." Vivian reached out and took his hand. "I'm not trying to take over your life. I'm trying to build a life with you. But I need you to meet me halfway. To trust that I'm not going anywhere just because things get hard." Adrian squeezed her hand. "I'm trying. I really am." "I know," Vivian said, "and I love you for it. But we both have to try. Okay?" "Okay," Adrian said. They sat there for a while, just holding hands, until the doorbell rang with the pizza. Mia came back out, still looking worried, and they all ate together in the living room. Adrian apologized to his daughter for snapping, and she forgave him the way kids do. Easily, completely, without holding grudges. Later that night, after Mia was asleep, Vivian and Adrian lay in bed together, not talking, just existing in the same space. "I'm scared too," Vivian said into the darkness. Adrian turned to look at her. "Of what?" "Of messing this up," Vivian said. "Of being too much. Of pushing too hard and driving you away." She paused. "I spent so much of my life being in control of everything. And with you, I don't have that. I can't control how you feel or what you need, and that's terrifying." Adrian reached over and pulled her closer. "You're not too much. You're exactly what I need. I'm just learning how to accept that." "We're a mess," Vivian said with a shaky laugh. "Yeah," Adrian agreed. "We are. But we're trying." "Yeah," Adrian said again. "We are." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, still figuring it out. 3 months later, Adrian got his first A on a midterm exam. He stared at the grade on the paper, disbelieving, and had to read it 3 times before it sank in. Then he called Vivian from the parking lot, his voice shaking with something that felt like hope. "I did it," he said when she answered. "I actually did it." "I knew you would," Vivian said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you," Adrian said. "Yes, you could have," Vivian said, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." That night, they celebrated with takeout and ice cream, and Mia drew him a congratulations card with about 100 stars on it. Adrian taped it to the fridge and felt, for the first time in years, like maybe things were actually going to be okay. The conversation about the future came on a Saturday afternoon in early spring. They were at the park, watching Mia play on the swings with a group of other kids. Vivian was leaning against Adrian's shoulder, and he had his arm around her, and everything felt still and quiet in a way that made it easy to talk. "I've been thinking," Vivian said. "About?" "About us," Vivian said. "About where this is going." Adrian felt his stomach tighten. "Okay. I don't mean that in a scary way," Vivian said quickly. "I just mean, I want to know what you want. Long term." Adrian was quiet for a moment, watching Mia laugh as she swung higher. "I want this," he said finally. "What we have. I want it to keep going." "Me too," Vivian said. "But I need to know if you see a future where we're actually building something together, not just dating, not just figuring it out day by day, but actually committing to each other." Adrian's heart was pounding now. "What are you asking?" Vivian pulled back to look at him. "I'm asking if you can see yourself building a life with me. A real life. One where we make decisions together. Where we're not just surviving, but actually living." Adrian looked at her, At the woman who'd walked into his life on one of the worst nights he'd ever had and refused to leave even when things got hard. The woman who loved his daughter like she was her own. The woman who'd fought for him when he was too scared to fight for himself. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "I can see that." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "Yeah?" "Yeah," Adrian said again. "I want that with you." Vivian kissed him then, soft and slow, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "So, what does that look like?" Adrian asked. "Practically, I mean." "I don't know," Vivian admitted, "but I think we start by stopping the halfway measures. I want you to move in with me, you and Mia. My place is bigger, closer to your school, and Mia would have her own room. A real room, not just a corner of a studio." Adrian's first instinct was to say no, to say it was too much, too fast, too generous. But then he thought about Mia, about giving her more space, a better school district, a life that wasn't constantly balanced on the edge of falling apart. And he thought about Vivian, about what it would mean to wake up next to her every morning, to build something real and lasting. "Okay," he said. Vivian blinked. "Okay?" "Yeah," Adrian said, "let's do it." Vivian laughed, bright and genuine, and kissed him again. "Really?" "Really," Adrian said. "But I'm paying rent, or at least contributing. I'm not just moving in for free." "We can work that out," Vivian said, still smiling. "I'm just glad you said yes." They told Mia that night over dinner. "We're going to move," Adrian said carefully, "to Vivian's place. Would you be okay with that?" Mia's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really," Vivian said. "You'd have your own room. We could paint it whatever color you want, and there's a park right across the street." Mia looked between them, her expression serious. "Would you be there every day?" "Every day," Vivian said. "And Daddy too?" "Me too," Adrian said. Mia thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. "Okay, can my room be purple?" They both laughed, relief flooding through them. "Purple it is," Vivian said. The move happened over the course of 2 weeks. Adrian packed up their small apartment, sorting through years of accumulated life and deciding what to keep and what to let go. Vivian helped, and so did Lauren, Adrian's sister, who showed up with boxes and packing tape and 1,000 questions. "So you're really doing this?" Lauren said, wrapping dishes in newspaper. "Yeah," Adrian said, "I am." Lauren looked at him. "You happy?" Adrian paused, considering it. "Yeah, I think I am." "Good," Lauren said. "You deserve it." "I don't know about that," Adrian said. "I do," Lauren said firmly. "You've been carrying the world on your shoulders for so long. It's about time someone helped you hold it up." Adrian felt his throat tighten. "Thanks, Laure." "Don't get sappy on me," Lauren said, but she was smiling. "Just promise me you'll let yourself be happy. Actually happy. Not just surviving, but living." "I promise," Adrian said. The first night in Vivian's apartment felt surreal. Mia ran from room to room, exploring every corner, exclaiming over the size of the bathroom and the fact that there was a dishwasher. Adrian stood in the middle of the living room, his boxes stacked along the wall, and tried to process the fact that this was real. Vivian came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You okay?" "Yeah," Adrian said. "Just adjusting." "Take your time," Vivian said. "There's no rush." They spent the evening unpacking the essentials and ordering Chinese food. And by the time Mia went to bed in her new purple room, Adrian felt like maybe this could actually work. Later that night, lying in bed with Vivian curled against his side, Adrian said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me," Adrian said. "For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Vivian propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You don't give yourself enough credit. You were already building something. I just helped you build it faster." "Still," Adrian said, "I wouldn't be here without you." "And I wouldn't be here without you," Vivian said. "You taught me what it means to actually live, instead of just working all the time. You gave me something to come home to." She paused. "You gave me a family." Adrian pulled her closer, his chest tight with emotion. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" "Yeah," Vivian said, "we are." 6 months later, Adrian graduated from the community college with an associate degree in engineering. He walked across the stage in a cap and gown that felt ridiculous, and when they called his name, he heard Mia screaming, "That's my daddy!" from the audience, and he couldn't stop grinning. Vivian was there, sitting next to Mia, and when he looked out into the crowd and saw them both cheering for him, he felt something break open in his chest. After the ceremony, they went out to dinner at a nice restaurant, the kind Adrian would never have been able to afford on his own. Mia ordered chicken fingers and spent the whole meal telling everyone at the table about how proud she was of her dad. "You did it," Vivian said, raising her glass. "We did it," Adrian corrected. "This was a team effort." "To teams, then," Vivian said. They clinked glasses, and Adrian felt for the first time in his life like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. A few weeks later, Adrian got a job offer. It was an entry-level position at a mid-sized engineering firm. Nothing flashy, but it came with benefits and a salary that was double what he'd been making at the warehouse. He'd applied on a whim, not really expecting anything, but they'd called him in for an interview and apparently liked what they saw. He accepted immediately. "This is it," he told Vivian that night, his voice shaking with excitement. "This is the start." "I'm so proud of you," Vivian said, and she meant it all the way through. "I couldn't have done it without you," Adrian said again. "Maybe," Vivian said, "but you're the one who showed up. You're the one who did the work. I just made sure you had the space to do it." Adrian kissed her. "I love you." "I love you too," Vivian said. The change wasn't immediate, but it was real. Adrian started his new job and discovered he was actually good at it, better than good. The skills he'd learned in school translated into real-world applications, and his supervisors noticed. Within 6 months, he was getting assigned to more complex projects. Within a year, he was leading a small team. At home, things settled into a rhythm. Mia thrived in her new school, making friends and bringing home report cards that made Adrian's chest swell with pride. Vivian's company continued to grow, but she'd learned to set boundaries, to leave work at the office, and actually be present when she came home. They had dinner together most nights. They argued sometimes about small things and occasionally big things, but they always worked through it. They built a life that was messy and imperfect and real. And slowly, Adrian stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. He stopped expecting Vivian to leave, stopped feeling like he had to prove he was worthy of being loved. Stopped believing that happiness was something that only happened to other people, because he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Not just surviving, but living. One evening, about a year and a half after they'd moved in together, Adrian came home to find Vivian sitting on the couch with a strange expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong," Vivian said. I have something to ask you." Adrian's heart started pounding. "Okay." Vivian took a breath. "I know we've talked about the future, about building a life together, and I know we're already doing that, but I want to make it official." She pulled a small box out of her pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring. Adrian's breath caught. "I'm not asking you to marry me," Vivian said quickly. "Not yet. I know that's a big step, and we're still figuring things out. But I want you to have this, as a promise, that I'm in this, all the way, for the long haul." Adrian stared at the ring, his throat tight. "Vivian." "I love you," Vivian said, her voice shaking. "I love you and Mia, and I want to spend the rest of my life building something with you, so this is me officially saying that. No more halfway, no more waiting for the right moment. This is it." Adrian took the ring out of the box with trembling hands. It fit perfectly on his finger. He looked up at Vivian, his eyes wet. "I love you too, so much." Vivian smiled, tears streaming down her face. "So you'll keep it?" "Yeah," Adrian said, his voice cracking. "I'll keep it." They kissed then, long and slow, and when they finally pulled apart, Adrian looked down at the ring on his finger and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was real. This was lasting. This was home. Mia found them a few minutes later, still sitting on the couch, Adrian's hand clasped in Vivian's. "What's that?" she asked, pointing at the ring. "It's a promise," Adrian said, from Vivian to me." "What kind of promise?" "That we're a family," Vivian said softly. "The three of us. For real." Mia climbed up onto the couch between them, studying the ring seriously. "Does this mean you're going to marry Daddy?" Vivian glanced at Adrian, who smiled. "Maybe someday," Vivian said, "if he'll have me." "I think he will," Mia said confidently. "He loves you. He told me." Adrian laughed, pulling them both close. "Yeah, I do." They sat there together, the three of them, and Adrian felt a kind of peace he'd never known before, because this was what it meant to let someone in, to stop fighting alone, to build something with another person that was bigger than either of you could create on your own. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. There would still be hard days and arguments and moments when the fear crept back in. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that was enough. 2 years later, Adrian stood in front of a small gathering of friends and family in Vivian's parents' backyard and married the woman who'd changed his life. Mia stood beside them as the flower girl, grinning so wide her face looked like it might split in half. Lauren cried through the whole ceremony, and when the officiant asked if anyone objected, Mia loudly declared, "No way! They're perfect together." Everyone laughed, and Adrian felt his chest swell with a kind of joy he hadn't known was possible. After they exchanged vows and rings, real ones this time, Vivian leaned in and whispered, "I told you we'd figure it out." "Yeah," Adrian said, kissing her. "You did." The reception was small and chaotic and perfect. Mia danced with everyone, including the photographer. Lauren gave a toast that made Adrian cry. And Richard Tan, of all people, showed up with a bottle of expensive champagne and an apology. "I was wrong about you," he told Adrian quietly. "You're good for her, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." Adrian shook his hand. "Thank you." As the sun set and the party wound down, Adrian found himself standing at the edge of the yard, watching Vivian dance with Mia, both of them laughing. His sister came up beside him. "You look happy." "I am," Adrian said. "Good," Lauren said. "You earned it." Adrian thought about that, about the nights he'd spent terrified and alone, about the moments he'd wanted to give up, about all the times he'd been sure that happiness wasn't meant for people like him. And he thought about Vivian, about the way she'd refused to let him push her away, about the way she'd fought for him even when he couldn't fight for himself, about the way she'd taught him that letting people in wasn't weakness, it was strength. "Yeah," he said finally. "I guess I did." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Mia was asleep in the guest room, Adrian and Vivian sat on the back porch together, still in their wedding clothes, watching the stars. "What are you thinking about?" Vivian asked. "About how far we've come," Adrian said. "About how different things are now." "Good different?" "The best different," Adrian said. He turned to look at her. "You know what the hardest part was?" "What?" "Learning to believe I deserved this," Adrian said quietly. "That I deserved to be happy. That I deserved you." Vivian took his hand. "You always deserved it. You just needed someone to remind you." "You did more than remind me," Adrian said. "You showed me. Every single day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just existing in each other's presence. Finally, Adrian said, "I think that's what love is. Not just feeling something, but choosing someone. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." "Yeah," Vivian said softly. "I think you're right." Adrian squeezed her hand. "Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for letting me," Vivian said. They stayed there until the sky started to lighten, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for the future, and just being together. And as the sun rose on their first day as a married couple, Adrian realized something. For so long, he'd believed that asking for help was the same as admitting defeat, that needing someone meant you were weak, that love was something that happened to other people, not to exhausted single fathers who could barely make rent. But he'd been wrong, because the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. The truth was that none of us are meant to do this alone. That strength isn't about carrying everything by yourself. It's about knowing when to let others help carry the weight. That love isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about finding someone who helps you become who you're meant to be. Adrian had spent years building walls to protect himself and his daughter from getting hurt. And in doing so, he'd almost missed out on the one thing that could actually make them whole. But he hadn't missed it. He'd found it. Or maybe it had found him. Either way, he was here now, with a woman who loved him, a daughter who was thriving, and a future that felt less like something to survive and more like something to look forward to. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There would still be challenges ahead, bills to pay, careers to balance, a child to raise, and all the messy complications that came with building a life together. But they'd face it as a team, as partners, as a family, and that made all the difference. As the morning light spilled across the yard, Vivian rested her head on Adrian's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her and they sat there together, watching the world wake up. "Ready for the rest of our lives?" Vivian asked. Adrian smiled. "Yeah, I am." And he meant it, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting alone. It's opening the door when someone knocks and letting them see all the broken parts of you. It's saying yes when every instinct tells you to run. It's choosing to believe that maybe, just maybe, you deserve to be happy. And it's learning that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being real, about showing up, about choosing each other again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's what Adrian had learned. That's what Vivian had taught him. And as they sat there together, the beginning of their forever stretched out before them, Adrian finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, not a house, or an apartment, or a city, but a person, a family. A choice made every single day to keep building something together, one imperfect moment at a time. And that was everything.